So at this point, we're now ready to start writing the code to make our calculator calculate. So you should have the calculator project open like I've got on screen and be editing main activity.java, which I've got open. And at the moment, there should be just a single method in there, which we have talked about previously, and that method's onCreate. Now all the application does at the moment is to display the layout on the screen. Then Android will be watching the buttons, but as we haven't attached any code to them, nothing's going to happen when we tap them. So it's probably a good idea to think about what we want to do. So actually, let's go and have a look at some flowcharts describing how this application will ultimately work. So this is a flowchart on the right-hand side showing the main part of the program and what the program flow is going to be. So we've already got the code to display the layout on the screen. That's the or the call rather, to set content view that you saw that will display our activity_main layout that we've already created. Next, we'll need to perform some initialization. So this will find all the buttons we're interested in, then set their on-click listener so that they actually do something when they're tapped. So the program will then wait, waking up every time the Android framework calls one of the listeners that we've set. That's the button click process after the initialization. Now once a button is clicked, we need to decide if it was one of the digit keys or the decimal point, in which case we just append it to the number on the screen, or if it represents an operation to perform on the numbers, plus, minus, multiply, divide or equals. So the flowchart shows a decision being made there, but that's a representation of how the program works and doesn't directly correspond to how we're going to code it. So in place of a test to see what kind of button was clicked, we're going to assign one of two different listeners to the different types of buttons. So the digits and decimal point buttons will have one on-click listener and the operations button will have another. Now the flowchart is accurate, but when you see one of those decision diamonds in a flowchart, you generally expect to see an if statement in the code. Now we'll be implementing the decision by the listeners we attached to the buttons instead. So the digit or decimal point listener is going to be very simple. It just reads the caption on the button and appends it to the number that's being built up in the edit text on the screen. When one of the operations buttons is tapped, it will read the number from the edit text, then check to make sure there was actually a number there. If there isn't, and the edit box is empty, the operation is stored as a pending operation and the program goes back to waiting for another button to be clicked. And it will update the little text view on the left with the symbol for the operation that was tapped, just to remind the user what arithmetic operation will be performed when they press the equals button. Now if there was a number, the program will perform whatever operation was pending, then display the result. So the program will allow you to do things like 3 plus 50 minus 2 times 8 and update the result after each stage. So when you type the 3, it will appear on the display. But when you press plus, there's nothing to add to 3, so the pending operation becomes plus. Once you've entered 50, the minus button will cause the plus operation to be performed, and the result, in this case 53, will appear in the result. The pending operation will then be minus, so after 2 is entered, the multiply button will cause a subtraction to be performed. The result being 42 will be displayed and the pending operation will then be multiply. Once 8 is entered, nothing will happen until another operation key, including equals, is tapped, then the new result will be displayed. So that looks fairly straightforward, so let's go and start writing some code. Okay, so I'm just going to close the project pane to make a bit more space. It's probably a good habit to get into. I tend to find that I focus better when I'm not sort of distracted by all the other panes being open. So we've got our main activity.java opened. So what we need to do is firstly start off with the fields that are going to ultimately hold the references to the 3 widgets that will be updated or read while the program's running, and then add some variables to store the operands and the pending operation. So we're going to do that by putting some code down here directly under the public class main activity line. So we're going to start with the edit text. private edit text result. And the next line, private edit text new number. And then private text view, call this one display operation. Then we also want, I'm going to put a comment in here. 2 slashes indicates a comment, which is there for me to sort of more or less set a comment that I can read later or another programmer can read later. And we're going to type in variables to hold the operands and type of calculations. And we want 3 variables here. The first one is going to be private double, making sure you type a capital D there for double. We'll call that one operand 1. We'll set that initially to null. Private double operand 2 equals null. Now, technically an object is set to null anyway, but it's a good habit to get into to do that. And lastly, the pending operation. We're going to do private string pending operation equals, and I'm going to set that to equals, so an equals sign in double quotes. Okay, so that's our references to the 3 widgets and some variables to store the operands and the pending operation defined. In the onCreate method, what we need to do is find those widgets and store the references to them in those 3 variables. And we also need to do that for the 16 buttons on our calculator. So let's start typing. I'm going to start typing here on line 20. Actually, we'll make a space there, but I'll start on line 23 and make a bit of a space. So result equals, and we saw this with the button counter app, edit text. We had to cast it to an edit text and use the find view by ID, r.id.result. Next is our new number. New number is equal to, that's also an edit text, find view by ID, r.id.new number, linking it to the widgets that we've defined in our layout, and display operation is equal to, that's a text view, and that's going to be find view by ID, r.id.operation. Okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to assign 16 buttons. So we haven't set those up as fields, rather we've set those up purely as variables in this method, and you'll see why shortly. So button 0 is equal to, this time it's a button, and be find view by ID, r.id.button 0. And what I'm going to do is copy this a number of times for the remaining 15 buttons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And I'll make a bit of space down here in case you've got this video subtitled so that you can still see the subtitles when I'm typing. I'm going to change the names for each. It's going to be button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And next is button dot. We want a button equals. And we might separate those because these are operations now. Equals, divide, multiply. Okay, we've got minus and plus. Minus and plus. Then we also need to change them on the right hand side. So we're going to change these references so they are pointing to the right one. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Button dot. Making sure we select the right one. Button dot. Next one's equals. Button equals. And notice when I leave it for a second, Android Studio will pop up a suggestion. If we type in a D, this time it's divide. And multiply. Multiply. Then we've just got minus. Then the last one is our plus. P. Plus. So that should be it. So just a quick check now to make sure that I've got those all correct. Okay, they all look correct to me. And putting blank lines in your code is definitely recommended to help separate any part of code. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm separating the 2 distinct group of buttons to make the code a little bit more readable, because of course the buttons from line 40 through 44 are operations, when the other ones are basically the numbers in the dot. And above that I had the 3 find view by IDs for our other widgets on the screen. Now in the button click counter app, there was only one button, so we used an anonymous inner class to set its listener. Now here we're going to actually assign the same name to multiple buttons, so we're going to give the listener a name. So I'm going to start typing that. So it's going to be view.onClickListener. Listener is equal to new view. And as I start typing, remember I showed you this in the button app. Android Studio helpfully shows a pop-up. At the top there you can see with the words onClickListener. So if I just press enter now, you can see that it writes the rest of the code for us. So I suggest you always do look out for those pieces of code that get added automatically or created automatically by Android Studio. It saves typing, number one, but also that the chance of you making a typo is pretty much eliminated because the IDE, Android Studio itself, is writing the code in this case. Alright, so the variable listener holds a reference to a new onClick instance, and its onClick method just reads the caption, or will read the caption of the button using the getText method, then appends it to any text already in the new number add text widget. So the code for that will be button b equals button view. Now depending on what this says here, if it says view or view, you'll need to copy the same thing here. So if that said v, you'd make that v there, but in this case we're matching it to the same. So we've done that to find the button that was tapped in this case, and then we're going to append it. So it's new number dot append b dot get text dot to string. So that's all that code needs to do, and then we need to put a semicolon on there as well. Okay, just put that up there. So what actually happens in this case? Well, when a button's tapped and the Android framework calls the onClick method, it passes in a reference to a button that was tapped. This is this view here you can see here on line 48. Remember that all widgets are views, so any widget that's tapped can be passed as a parameter to onClick as an instance of its base class view. Now, not all views can have text, so before we can call the getText method, we actually have to cast it to a widget that does have the getText method, a button in this case. And that's what we're doing on line 49. And we're doing that because we know we've attached this listener, or will be attaching this listener, to buttons only. The next step now that we've done that is to actually assign this listener to each of the 11 buttons, 0 through 9, as well as the decimal point, so that it's called when any one of them or each one of them is actually clicked. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to just type button 0 dot set onClick listener. Then we need to do the same for the remaining 10 buttons. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Go down a little bit. And we just come up and change our references. So we come over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And also our dot as well. Now, if we wanted to be clever, we could have stored all the button variables in an array and looped through it to set the listener instead of copying each line like this. But with only 11 buttons, it probably wouldn't save any lines of code. But if I was implementing, say, a full keyboard, then I'd certainly look at doing something like that. So that's some really basic code there. I'm going to finish the video here now. In the next video, let's run this just to make sure the basics are working before moving on to expanding our calculator application. See you in the next video.